I wanted to ask you, you got three U15 teams. Everybody drafts their own players. Uh, and right now at the U13 level, there's a bit of a dilemma picking captains.
Yeah.
And how have you found your picking of captains, whether it's this year or any other year? How have you managed to deal with it to avoid dissension or conflict with parents and players who sort of lobby to be the captain?
Well, what I did just on the weekend, we drove up on Thursday, and it's an 8-hour drive to Kelowna. So I talked to every player. I had everybody come in front of the bus and talk to them, get to know them a little bit, and then I said, "Well, who would you think would make good captains?" And every player gave their opinion, and Jim was behind me. And then he wrote down who they said, and it was really consistent. One player was mentioned by almost everybody, maybe everybody, and 4 players were just mentioned all the time. And that's, we all, like, if we disagreed with it, we wouldn't, but we all kind of thought the same way, the coaches.
Yeah.
So the next day we announced the captains, the captain and 3 assistant captains. And then I met with the captains, Jim and I and Emily, we met with the captains. I went over the team covenant, examples of the team covenant.
Yeah.
And they're going to meet with the players to develop a team covenant. They might have done it on the bus. They talked about doing it on the bus, but it kind of didn't sound like they were doing that on the bus, but they might have. So I'll see them tonight. And so by the end, we travel to Lethbridge tomorrow. So if it isn't done now, then on the way to Lethbridge, they can talk about it. But I mean, there can be no dispute because the players basically chose it and they didn't vote in front of each other or do anything, So it's kind of, and the players were really consistent. There's a few others that were mentioned quite a few times.
Yeah.
But not as much as the ones that we chose, or the players chose, probably.
Yeah. Tom, over the number of years of coaching, have you made mistakes, poor choices of captains?
Oh yeah, I have. A couple of times I named too many, and I'd have a few assistants that one was home, one was away. And we talked about doing that this year, and I said, no, I'm not doing that again. It just dilutes it too much.
Yeah.
And I know coaching the college women, they're the last team I coached. That group of girls had gotten rid of a coach.
Yeah.
And that kind of empowered them.
Yeah.
And I really didn't. We didn't have very good leadership there. It was more like a sorority than a hockey team.
Yeah.
That players were supposed to play according to their popularity, not what they do on the ice. So yeah, it's such an important decision, especially with older players. That if you don't have a good captain, and then I've chosen great captains, like one guy that stayed in Germany. He's still in Germany at SAIT. He was a terrific captain, and guys like that. So probably missed it about 10% of the time. Made bad choices.
What are the qualities that stand out for you? The girls you selected, or any captains you've had where you've had success?
Well, I think first of all, they have to be better than average players. You couldn't have your weakest player. You know what I mean? And they have to be inclusive, not just hang out with their friends. They have to care about care about that. They have to buy into what you're preaching, right? If they have a totally different view of the game or how players are, then that's going to be nothing but a conflict. So, I think those are important things. And basically they have to be good people. So, I don't know.
Well, you're speaking from experience and your words are wise. Um, I think you should write a book on the lessons of picking captains. Uh, some of the people we've had on before, there is a book on once you pick them, you got to develop them. Is there
Yeah.
anything you've done that has helped them become better leaders?
Well, I think the key is you have to talk to them about what it's all about. You can't just assume they know how to do it, how to be a leader. And you have to kind of stay on top of what's going on. And if it starts going left on you, you've got to step in there or you can lose the team.
Do you have formal leadership meetings with all the captains, or do you just talk to them whenever?
Well, when I've done a good job, I'll have a meeting every week and ask them how things are going.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard in the minor when you don't, you see them twice a week and you get there, especially with girls, you get there, they're in one dressing room, you can't go in that one, so
Yeah.
like tonight, we practice at 4 o'clock. Their parents have to leave work early, get their kid, drive them across the one end of the city, and then they want to get out of there after because it's supper time. We practice from 4 to 5:30.
Yeah.
So there's logistics thing, and when you live in a big city, for sure.
Peter, I'm curious about your experience as a coach, as a head coach, and maybe as an assistant in terms of selecting captains. Did you have any process or things that worked for you?
Well, I agree. Honestly, everything Tom said. I mean, that's kind of been a very, very similar approach in that. And I think to your point about the development piece, I think that's where the key is, because you've got this individual or individuals who you feel are good candidates, but now how do we develop that? I mean, one of the things I used to do was I used to ask them to give me an example, write down 2 or 3 individuals that they thought were good leaders. And that could be, and I'm not talking about the team, it could be a professor, it could be someone in their family, it could be a sports figure, a person in history. Who are those 2 or 3 leaders and why? Like, why do you perceive them as good leaders? And then we'd meet and we discuss it. And we typically what they learn is there are different leadership styles, and get them to try to blend maybe those styles that they saw that were different, but they could sort of blend them together and make them think about what really a good leader is, like what it really means. So that was pretty effective. And then also, like with Tom, like he said, when we're doing a good job at it, meeting with them on a weekly basis, what's going on? What can I help you with? Are you struggling with anything? Are there things I need to know? So I think that important part is the making those individuals aware. Don't tell them they're captains. Don't appoint them as captains and then sort of leave them on an island and then be upset later in the year and say, well, I had lousy leadership. That's one of my pet peeves, right? One of my pet peeves is the coach that picks captains, the season doesn't go well, and then one of the first things they do is blame their captains and, yeah, we didn't have good leadership, we weren't good in the room. Well, at the end of the day, everything falls on you as a head coach. So again, that phrase, be curious, right, before you're judgmental. Why wasn't the room good? Was there anything that I could have done as the ultimate leader, if you will, as a head coach to improve the situation and had possibly made it better? And if so, hopefully learn from that.
Oh yeah, there can be some tough situations. One college team I had this, we had a leader that, the girl that played, she was really good, really happy-go-lucky, pleasant, good leader. And she wanted to emulate the girl that was before, who I didn't think was very good. But what happened to this poor girl is this one player came up to her and said, I talked to everybody on the team and nobody mentioned you as a captain. And she started off like this, eh? And she made life hell for this poor girl. I'm the only one that they mentioned it to, and everybody mentioned, including that girl, to her. So she had this to deal with all year. And, this girl just absolutely ruined her season because the kind of personality she was. So I was really remiss in not helping her out a lot more, in this situation. So like you say, you have to help your players know what to do.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, they all have their image, their vision of what a captain maybe is. Just like,
Yeah.
right, you have your vision, especially when you're younger and you get that first head coaching job, you have a vision of what a head coach is. And then
Yeah.
at some point you realize, man, I was way off base. And then you
Yeah.
learn. But for us, putting those people in that position of authority, it's on us, incumbent on us to teach them what that really means and support it.
Yeah.
Peter,
Oh, for sure. They like nobody's trained them how to do this. And if they end up with a terrible situation, you got to give them a hand.
Yeah, exactly.
I know we tried to intervene later, but it's kind of gone off the rails by then.
Yep.
And, you live and learn.
Sure do.
Peter, I think what you've said about, maybe you can repeat it. You ask questions. You engage them. You found out what they were thinking. Which, by doing that, you could be a better coach knowing what they're thinking and taking advantage of that and guiding them to better leadership.
Yeah, because very often I think, and I mean, see what you guys think about this, but very often it's your players that have the answers in so many situations, as opposed to you as the coach. You as a coach, you'll have systems, you'll have protocols, you'll have covenants, right? You'll have your culture that you think you want to create, but they are the ones that will give you the answers to all of those questions on how you do it and what's the best way to approach it, I think.
Is there, have you ever created a formal list of questions to ask captains during the season?
I don't think I've ever done anything where I've actually written it down, but I have the process, like I was saying, of once the captains are selected, and the captains, the way I've done in the past is they're typically selected, by the team. There's a voting process. Once they're selected, then we start, okay, what does it mean to be a captain? What are your goals as a captain? How do you intend to reach those goals with your players and make them aware that, and you're going to get players who will push back, who think that you're the best captain ever picked. There's going to be players who think that you're the worst captain ever picked. And there'll be players who are in the middle, waiting to see what the popular individuals in the room think, and they'll jump onto that bandwagon as well. So how do we deal with that? How do we get everybody on the same page? Right? Just like you do as a coach, trying to get your players on the same page to buy into a system. We're trying to get you to buy into, if you will, a system of what it means to be a player for playing for your team.
I think Tom mentioned it. How do you avoid it being a popularity contest? A captain has to, I don't like the word popularity, but they have to be sort of stand out in some way, whether it's in being quiet and by example of how they walk, talk, play. But Tom, your problems you've had in the past, you said it was a sorority, not a hockey team. And I personally have to say my biggest weakness as a coach was selecting captains and not developing them and not following through on them. I totally missed the boat in that and lost pretty high level coaching jobs because I did not engage the captains. I never asked them what they thought. I never asked them to share points. I just separated myself from the team and I let them lead themselves. And in the end, I missed the boat a few years, but learned a lot in the process. But right now at our U13 level, there is sort of a movement. People want to be captains, or parents think their kids should be captains, and if they're not selected, you've got to deal with it. Because, and I have to give credit to the U13 coaches. They're talking to each other and bringing this up. They're having discussions about how to pick the best captains and how to deal with the after effects of captain selection. And that happens at the U13 level. And I don't know, Tom, in minor hockey, if you've ever encountered it, any flack about the captains that were picked that you had to address.
I haven't had too much from parents, but oh yeah, that we certainly some players want to be captains, and sometimes goalies want to be captains, and you have to explain to them that they can't be. But anyways, yeah, I like you. I haven't worked close enough with some captains to help them out, and it is something. It's another thing you have to coach, and I think I got to make sure that like we go on bus trips, so that's a good time to talk to them. Like I said, it's difficult in the arenas when you get there and then everybody leaves, kind of a deal, and the parents are waiting to go and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it's certainly something I need to do a better job of. Our whole coaching staff does.
Tom, something else that I did, this is not really captain related, but more team related, is when I was coaching a midget team, I had all the players, I asked them to write me a paragraph on who they thought was a hero in their life and why. And that was pretty interesting. I'd never done it. I have worked with some women, some girls teams, high school age, but I've never done it on the girls or women's side. Be interesting exercise to do, I think.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Plus, if you
Yeah,
have
the
a
more that you can get to know how they're thinking, the
yeah,
better, right?
yeah,
Sure.
exactly. What, like, who do they perceive and why it gives you an insight into what their value system is.
Yeah.
And that can be helpful.
That's great, Peter. And I really like the idea of describing a leader you admire in the real world,
Yes. Yeah.
whether it's a teacher, an athlete, a coach, politician or whatever, it you discover their values, their roots, their base, what they appreciate that affect them. And not a bad thing to do with all the players.
No, and it's funny because you'll get everything from, someone may pick a parent, someone may pick a relative, and then somebody else picks, who's getting the most hits on YouTube that week, or who's the most popular rock star, right? It's all over the place what you get for answers. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Well, this is the time of year. I don't know at what age captains need to be named and educated. Uh, U11, I don't know. What about the minor hockey ages and lower? You have to name captains and you'd rotate them and give everybody a chance. What's your understanding, Peter, in your environment?
We don't. So so if you're you have to break it down. If you're like a town team, your local youth organization, if you will, you usually see it at the Bantam level, that 13, 14 level. When you get to the AAA level, for some reason, even going all the way down to squirts, kind of like what you gentlemen were talking about, the parents feel the need for there to be a captain. So all of a sudden their children feel the need for there to be a captain because that's what was talked about, at dinner time. So it depends on the level of hockey that your child's involved with.
And also you need captains. You have to have a captain talk to the ref.
Yeah.
So you actually do need it, whether you rotate everybody through or whatever, but somebody's got to be a captain.
Yeah, I mean with us, Tom, like with the town youth hockey, honestly, as long as you're not really abrasive or abusive, the officials are fine with coming over and talking to the coaches and explaining them what's going on. So that the idea is that I explain to you as the adult, then you can share that information on the bench with the other players so that they get a better understanding of what's going on.
Yeah.
Because like, again, it's hard sometimes if you're 10, 12 years old and this adult is telling you something, is that the exact message that actually gets translated to the bench?
Yeah.
I got a question. Take it to the highest level. And I want to talk about NHL captains and some of them that seem to emulate what we think are traits that just help them do their job. Who do you think the strongest NHL captains are? They're the best player, or are they the best captains?
Well, they have to be pretty good players first to be a captain.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. They have to be able to demonstrate some measure of respect on the ice as well as off the ice.
So there's some pretty darn good ones in the NHL. Crosby comes to mind. The Calgary's captains. He's well chosen and well respected by teammates and by the coaching staff.
He's one of the only Swedes that wanted to stay here.
Yeah. Loyalty. Yeah. I think that's a word that they don't have their own agenda trying to worry about what's best for them. They're more worried about what's best for the team. And I think that's sort of what the best captains do. Like Crosby taking a salary cut to help his team. And I think that really speaks highly of it because you really need to make 11 million a year at that level. But I guess they're looking at the NFL and saying somebody's making 50 million a year. It's just, it's almost distracting the kind of money that you get caught up in that regard. So,
Yeah, and I've always said too, well, I always felt like, and I've used this example, and I don't know if I'm accurate or not, but it's the way I think at least. A really good captain is like a good dad, a good father. I think I've said that before, that, you know, you make sure that your kids have everything that they need and their wants and needs are taken care of before you worry about yourself. Like I always go back, like my dad had a sixth grade education and built a business, worked 2 jobs for 31 years. And, you know, we weren't wealthy, but we didn't want for anything. And that was because of some idea that he had, that he made sure his children were always taken care of. So I think that's the biggest trait of a good, for me, of a good captain, is you make sure, you know, something as simple as you're out on you're on the road, team dinner, captain's not the first guy in line, he's the last guy in line with the players, because he wants to make sure everybody's all set before he sits down and eats. And, you know, we were the same way as kids growing up. So I kind of use that example, that it's like a really good parent. A really good parent is a good captain.
I'd agree with that for sure.
I have a question about Tom. You mentioned goalies.
Yeah.
Roberto Luongo, was he not a captain with Vancouver?
Yeah, I think he was.
I I always wondered why and how it actually worked out.
Yeah, I don't know. He had such a presence in Vancouver, eh? So,
Yeah.
but Vancouver, you know,
Yeah, and I have to say too, one of our goaltenders, um, when I was coaching university, was captain, and probably one of the best captains I've ever had. He and a defenseman on that team, they were a great tandem. And the the goaltender is now an assistant coach with that team, and the defenseman is now looking to be in a program that's similar to the Navy SEALs. So pretty good leaders in their own rights.
I'm curious.
yeah, our goalie, one of our goalies is in the leadership group. So she met with the captains, but she's not a captain. You know what I mean? So
Yeah,
she's
yeah, I love that
so
idea too, Tom. I think
yeah,
that,
she really wanted to be part of the leadership group, and you know, watching her with the players, we've had them for about a month and a half now, so we got kind of a feel who's who, that she does have leadership qualities. I've never done that before, but we decided to go with it this year.
yeah, I think it's a good move. I mean, I had a year again at university where, I'm not saying you can have too many captains, but we're in a
Yeah,
situation where we had a really good senior class,
yeah,
and they all had something they could contribute. So we had our captain, our 2 assistant captains, but then we also had a leadership group of the remaining 4 or 5 seniors. So they all had a voice, and they were just another, earpiece and sounding board, if you will, for the captains, where they would bring things to the captains that maybe the captains weren't aware of going on, or concerns or questions that the players had. And they would meet with the captains, and then I would meet with the leadership group, both separately and then with the captains. And it worked out really well. And it really gelled the team, because everybody who kind of had been there and done that, so to speak, and built things, because we
yeah,
were a fairly new program, had they felt like they had a voice. So I think it's a good move if you have the right group.
yeah. And every team is so different. you know, and then if you've got, like in youth hockey, if you got some parents in the background undermining everything, that can really have a bad influence too, a negative influence.
Yeah, well, it's all we always say the best thing about youth hockey is volunteerism. The worst thing about youth hockey is volunteerism.
Yeah. Yeah, that was one thing nice about coaching college is you didn't have that kind of thing going on.
Yeah.
But I've had a 2 or 3 years that the parents have ruined the season. You know, just because whatever. And this is we're talking out of 45, 50 years. But if
Sure.
you get a bad group, they undermine everything that happens.
Yeah, and they don't even realize it, and they would never point to themselves as being a contributor to that poor season.
Oh, and then they wonder why their kids aren't chosen at the next level, at the highest level of it. Because
Right.
nobody wants them around for 7 months, undermining them.
Yeah, and when I was at prep school, one of the number one questions I was asked by the NCAA Division I coaches, and because they can tell how a player is, how they skate, how they move. They want to know, tell me about the kid on his worst day, and then tell me about the parents.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to deal with it. And because you're giving out scholarships at that level, you can get pretty much anybody you want, right? You've got your list, and A is just as good as G if you go down the list when you get to that level. But there's all those other contributing factors.
Yeah. Well, I told you guys in another Thursday how I worked with was one kid that was a great kid, and he played NCAA in the one of those high end schools there. And then we needed a forward in the pro team in Salzburg in the second pro team, and he probably would have ended up on the first pro team. And I threw his name out there, so the American coach called his friends because he knew all the coaches, and the staff in the Div 1 school, and they said, you don't want him. His dad is calling us all the time, what line he should play on, all this kind of stuff. So he didn't end up there, and I ended up getting him a contract in Finland. His dad was calling the coaching staffs,
Yeah.
telling him who he should be playing with and everything like that. And he kind of got him blackballed. No one would touch him in Europe. So he burned all his bridges just by, and his kid now was, he graduated college. He was probably 24 years old. His dad was still doing it. I talked to his dad and I said, Brian, what are you doing? But it didn't seem to click.
No.
Tom, have you not picked players because of that?
Oh, yeah. Like on our draft, part of the whole process, we had one of our coaches coached spring hockey and coached almost everybody in spring hockey,
Oh.
and had a really good about the player, just about the whole player, about the whole situation. What are they going to bring to the team besides the hockey? And if it was going to be a bad attitude or, interfering parent or something. I mean, if you got two players, level, you go with a player that's going to be easier to work with and that'll actually listen to you.
Yeah. Wally, I sat with a good friend years back, and he was coaching prep school, and there was one particular player that he was interested in, and he asked me, he said, so who's the dad? And I pointed him out in the stands, and he looked at me and said, okay, thank you. And I watched him put a line through the player's name because the parent had just been completely out of control the entire game, and he didn't want any part of it. He liked the kid, but he didn't want to have to deal with the baggage.
Yeah, well, I think that happened to one of my players this year who was an amazing player. And, going up to the U18 and didn't didn't get picked up, and I'm sure it was because of problem with the parents. The kid was great, which is really too bad.
Yeah, it is. It is.
I think coaches, I know I used to be like this. Oh, I'll take that kid. I can turn him around. And that's sort of a philosophy, is that you don't like not giving a young player a chance to learn and grow from that experience. But I believe the way things have gone today relative to entitlement, uh, the investment parents have put into their kids in the game of hockey in terms of trying to achieve outcomes, I think you've got to avoid it versus taking the risk of trying to have a player adapt to a good culture versus have a family that might destroy that culture. So I think, Tom, I have a question. You said you've got the goalie part of your leadership group.
Yeah.
And Peter mentioned his leadership group was all the seniors who weren't selected. They felt part of it. Do you have more than one member of the leadership group, or are there others?
No, just that one goalie.
Okay.
She was even mentioned by a few people about, I asked them who would make good captains. And we've just watched as it's gone on and can see that she's an influential person in the team.
Yeah.
Because I've never done that before, but I have, like I said before, I've chosen too many captains and had a captain, assistant. One was home and one was away, and I'd never do that again. You live and learn.
Barry Midori, when he worked at Hockey Alberta, and he still is, in his role, they would pick captains. And he told me the story where the players were all in the dressing room. He was at the door and he announced that he wanted to meet with the captains after when they were leaving. He wanted the captains to stick around. And he said the looks on the faces of some of the others, it caused him to create a leadership group.
Yeah.
And he opened the door to anybody who wanted to be a part of the leadership group, could sit in on meetings, could give feedback, but they were recognized as, uh, he appreciated the importance of making everybody feel good about themselves and their role with the team. And if they're not named, if they're singled out and they're not a captain, and short-term competition like that, it can be a thunderbolt, a recipe for disaster. And he recognized that, so they took a more formal role on leadership education with captains and leadership groups. When you have a provincial competition, everybody's trying to walk the talk and toe the line of behavior and work ethic and shift length and good habits. And I think that's the goal of a governing body when it's coaching a team to do that. And Hockey Alberta's taken a pretty good lead in that regard. But we're leaving our coaches out to dry in the captain's process. And I do know that my U13 coaches are talking to one another and about captains selecting and the pros and cons. And it's not just picking names out of a hat, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's hard because I don't think there's one solution fits all because every team is different, for sure.
Peter and Tom, I've got a question about all your years of coaching, and you can mention a name. Who are some of your best captains and why?
Well, I'd say at SAIT, Greg Thompson, who's still in Germany, was a terrific captain, a terrific player. He's the guy Murray Heatley and I talked into going to Germany. He was going to go back to the Saskatchewan, work in the potash mine, and play senior hockey. And we talked him into giving it a try, and that was 30 years ago. And he's still there. Ended up marrying a German girl, played on their national teams, coaching pro hockey. But he was a terrific captain. And at Mount Royal, Laura LeBrun was a fantastic. I had a few good captains there. Katie Spark and her were both great captains. And on Jim's teams, we had a kid named Jesse Fink who was a terrific captain. So
And what were the qualities? They were authentic? Were they outspoken, respectful, best players? I don't know.
they weren't outspoken. They're pretty good players, like strong personalities, but they supported what the team was all about all the time, and they'd call players if they were deviating from it, or they'd stand up for their teammates. That you know just kind of somebody that you'd like to be a leader. They always had everybody's back.
Yeah. Peter, what about you?
Yeah, there's been a few. I'm not going to mention any names because honestly, I'm afraid I'm going to forget somebody. But they've all had the same thread through their approach, and that was that they would do anything for their teammates, supporting them. And again, university level, you're talking about supporting them not only with the ice hockey piece, but socially with maybe challenges they might have in relationships. With if you're a younger player and you're struggling, had almost all those captains be willing to sit down with those players and say, hey, I took that course when I was a freshman or when I was a sophomore. I had that professor. Let me help you with that. So they all had that type of leadership ability and were able to be that player who the younger players certainly felt they could go to, and they never made the older players feel like they were anything but peers either. So I think that for me, those were the qualities that all those guys had.
I have just one story about Claire Drake at the University of Alberta, pretty winning coach up here, Peter. At least 15 national championships in hockey, and one of the only coaches that's ever won a football national championship in the same year he won a hockey championship. And one of the things he did, he made sure his captains looked after any social outing that everybody was included. If somebody was missing, he wanted them to be aware of that and the inclusivity of every player. He tuned into that. That was something, a task he designated to his captains.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that's impressive, right? Because with hockey, we've got 20 some players, maybe hit the number 30 at the university level, maybe. But with the amount of players involved in a football team,
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
Well, I'm not sure in the year of football whether he was coaching hockey and he also coached football because back in that day, hockey seasons ended. You could play both sports, and you could coach both sports. So what had happened? Um, he was ended up the hockey season going to football, and the head coach got seriously ill. He took over the team.
Probably vice versa. The football season ended.
Yeah, pardon, you're right. Thanks, Tom. And the story I've heard, and I'm not sure if it's directly from Claire, but a good source. In one of the early practices, the captain quarterback dropped an F bomb on the field, and Claire sent him off. And he didn't finish the practice. And Claire talked to him after and said, "That's not who we are, and that's not who we want to be." And he felt it was sort of a turning point in establishing guidelines, an understanding of respect and emotional control and everything it takes to be a great performer. So I think those qualities of leadership demonstrated by Claire, and up here in Canada, he's the John Wooden of Canada, really, in terms of the championships and the culture. I don't think he was an English teacher and had the great one-liners like John Wooden had. They were masterful. But the philosophy of what they did and how they did it was absolutely amazing. I know in my induction in the Alberta Hockey Hall of Fame, my speech included a dedication to Claire Drake and Father David Bauer, and playing for the national team, and the values that both those gentlemen demonstrated to the athletes. And at the end of the talk, I said, Claire Drake was not a priest. He was, but he was cut from the same cloth as Father Bauer. It was just amazing. So I always like to jump in and pay a tribute to him, and the impact he's had on so many of us up here in Canada that people may not ever know about or even remember. Tom, you've had a great coach in Bemidji. You've talked about him very highly and his qualities of success.
Well, it was Bob Peters, and they just dedicated a bronze big huge statue to him a couple of months ago,
Yeah.
and he was just. I know there's this big thing is you never talk about winning and all this, and I think it's BS. He talked about winning from day one. He said what our goal in the season was to win the national championship.
Yeah.
And then he laid out what we needed to do. So before we got to step on the ice, and we didn't start till October because that's the way it was then. We had to run around the lake, which was about 10 miles before we were allowed on the ice. And it was all about hard work. It was all about everybody does everything properly all the time. And of course, we had a JV team where guys are itching to get their chance if you weren't going to do what it was all about. And he was great. He was kind of like Harry Neal with the one-liners. And all the time, you just knew, like if we scored a goal, everybody knew why we scored the goal. And if we got scored against, everybody knew why we got scored against. And there was real clarity in the way we played and who we were. And I think he won 13 national championships. And what happened, he was coaching at North Dakota. I heard his speech there when he retired. Coaching at North Dakota for the Fighting Sioux. And the president of Bemidji wanted to start a hockey program. So he called him and he said, I'll give you whatever you want. You name the price. I want to bring you here to start a hockey program. And he came in and they were outdoors, I think the first year or so. And then they built a rink and he went on from there. And yeah, it was just the clarity. And there was no, if you didn't want to buy in, like one guy on the 10-mile run, he took a ride. One of his friends said, hey, I can give you a ride for a few miles if you want. He jumped in the car and he led the team in scoring the year before. I never saw the guy skate. He got thrown off the team. And that was, there was no deviation from our goal. And I don't know, he was fun to play for.
Tom, your story of cutting a guy from the team, a leading scorer, Perry Pern, his first year of coaching at Nate, he did win a few national championships there.
I coached against him and beat us all the time, so I know.
Yeah. And he tells a story at coaching clinics his first year, and the team took a road trip to play at Colorado College. And it's the first time, and they're renting vans. He's got the van with all the equipment in it, and his assistant coaches with him. And the players have 2 or 3 other vans that they're using. And of course, the players left earlier. He left a little later. And as he was driving back into the city, one of the vans was stopped, and players were standing on the roadside with beers in their hands, and some of them were taking a leak in public. And he noted who they were, and they finished the road trip. When they got back to Edmonton, he met with the players, and those players were no longer on the team and no longer had a scholarship. And he said that was the most important thing he did, was holding people behaviorally accountable for what it takes. Just like the guy who decided to ride the car. And that's absolutely huge. Tom, I got one last question for you, because you've coached guys as a head, as an assistant, you've worked with other head coaches. What's your deal on curfews?
Well, you tell them what time what time they're supposed to have lights out in the room. And I know I benched my last, maybe one of the reasons I wasn't brought back. My last game at SAIT, a bunch of guys, we were playing Nate at 1 PM, and we played, and they were in first place, of course. And we'd played in, 3 hours away before that. We got to the hotel and they were sitting in the room drinking and all kinds of stuff. And I didn't play about 6 players against Nate because they did that. So, we just were on this road trip and we had a curfew on the road trip, and I expect players to follow it. I know one time Jim checked all the rooms with under 18 girls about 5 years ago or whatever. Knocked on the door, girls weren't asleep. He caught them. They were sitting there knitting. So we didn't punish them. So we just laughed about that one, but yeah. Yeah, you can't have players just partying, if you set a curfew, then they have to follow it.